Good evening. I'd like to bring our meeting to order. Monday, March the 6th, special school board work session. It's 5:30. The school board would like to take this moment to acknowledge respectfully that we are residing on the traditional land of the Dene people. Our mission is to provide an excellent, equitable education in a safe, supportive environment so that all students will succeed and contribute to a diverse and changing society. Ms. Richardson, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Doran,
Here.
Mrs. Burnett,
Here.
Mrs. Hardy,
Here.
Miss Maradi,
Here.
Mrs. Matheson,
Here.
Mrs. Smith,
Here.
Mrs. Sanderson.
Here.
Thank you. The board has a quorum.
Thank you. Chief School Administrator Karen Moline and Andrew DeGraw, Chief Operating Officer, will present the administration's FY 2023-2024 proposed budget. Director of Alternative Services and Program, Lori Beam, will also make her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, President Sanderson. So before we get to the presentation this evening, I'd like to just quickly go over some information that was sent out to you earlier concerning BEST and some questions that had come up about BEST and the building use. So in your packet, you'll find a couple of documents that speak to that. One is the cost of Nordell Education Center and the usage. And those documents will give you kind of a rundown of how the building is being used and what it's costing to operate the building. So I thought I'd just give you that information. And I also want to, I think I've said this before, but I'll just reiterate our BEST program there at the Nordell Education Center, and it's quite an extensive list of how that building is being used. So that'll give you a larger picture of the facility usage. And then also just to note that that the school itself has continued to grow throughout this school year. When it's the October count had us at about 740, and we're last year. And this year, at this point, we're at 855, I believe is our count. So we've seen some significant growth in the last year in our BEST program. 855 is on our enrollment right now. And there's a lot of energy and excitement around that building and that facility. So it's actually working as it's working famously. So we're really happy about that. And then another piece of information that had been asked for was the cost savings so far for the closure of the buildings last year, and that document is also in your packet. And bottom line of savings is about 2.6 at this point in the school year of savings for closing the buildings. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context on that before we started into the alternative programs, because we're going to cover some other of the alternative programs, but I did want to give you just a really quick update on BEST and then give you that information that's in your packet. So if there aren't any questions on BEST, we'll go ahead and have Ms. Beam begin the alternative programs presentation.
Mr. Dorn?
Are we going to come back to BEST, or this is the only time?
I thought we would address BEST now before we launch into our other programs.
Just a question on allocations. Do we know how many are paying tuition? We're using the full amount to subsidize tuition at private schools. My understanding is that parents can use their homeschool allocation to subsidize tuition where their students are going to private school. Do we have data on that?
I wouldn't say they subsidize their tuition. It's up to the parents to decide how they use that. Some of our parents use it for art classes that are outside. Some of them use it for some of the sports that they're attached to in clubs. Some of them use it for music classes. They use it in all variety of ways.
Right. And some of it goes to private schools.
That's up to the parents on how they
Right,
use that.
right.
So we
Okay.
don't know how much of those monies parents give to a private school.
Okay, okay. So just a clarification, if I might. So we don't write the check, we just write the check to the parent?
We give no money directly to
To
any
any-
private schools.
any
We give it directly to
Any
parents
entity? Okay.
and guardians, and they use it how they see fit.
Right. All right, thank you.
Ms. Marati, and for board members, if you'll just let the team get their questions out, clarify it, and if you have a clarifying answer, and just give them time to process the information. Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Marati.
Thanks. Just asking for clarity, doesn't the Nordell school, doesn't it have is it a principal or someone that leads that school? And if so, where's that cost in the printout that you just gave us?
For BEST? Oh, no, I'm sorry. BEST does have a principal, but the Nordell Education Center doesn't have its principal for the center because each program has their own lead person. So BEST has a principal, but that principal is not over the whole Nordell Education Center.
Go ahead. Ms. B, go ahead.
Okay, some of this you've seen before, and I've added some new information. I had questions about North Star College. This is the personnel at North Star College. We have hired a director. Her name is Stacy Kennedy. Counselor, we have Kristen Kelly, and then we have positions posted for an English teacher and an administrative secretary. And those are the personnel people that are paid for by our school district. And then on the UAF side of things, they have hired a director, an advisor, and they are also in the process of looking for an additional staff member who will help handle student rights and responsibilities in their office. And they're adding some adjunct professors to help with the increase of the 180 students. In our lottery, I broke down how much we have. Okay. All right, we're back. We had 220 students who submitted applications, and then I broke down where those students were from. We currently have the wait list we're keeping it open and it is ongoing, so we will continue taking students from on the wait list up until 2 weeks after the school year starts in August.
Matheson?
Thank you. Mrs. Beam, you said that we've got the wait list open and ongoing, but we have 220 students who have submitted applications. My understanding is that we were only accepting 180 this year. And I guess why do we still have that wait list open and ongoing if we have more than enough interest.
So out of those 220 students, some of them have, their applications were rejected because of not meeting qualifications. They didn't have the GPA or they were not on track for graduations. So we are slowly working our way through the wait list and, gosh, that doesn't want to stay up. And from our lottery, these are the numbers that were actually accepted. So we do have 90 juniors and 90 seniors. Those numbers will change slightly as we do have some parents who are changing their minds or students who are changing their minds, so we're moving students up through the wait list.
Ms. Moretti?
I have a really easy question. So I'm assuming BEH is Ben Eielson?
Yes,
Who's BHS?
Best High School.
Best. Oh, thanks.
High school. It is high school. BHS is high school, then we have BMS, which is middle school, and then BES, which is the elementary school, but all from homeschool. We have welcome nights. So actually tonight is our first night. Our incoming juniors are, and their parents are at UAF actually right now. And then they changed the March 7th date to March 8th, and that's our incoming seniors. Their parents and students will be there at UAF at the engineering building, and they will receive information on how to register, what it will look like, and get them started with UAF IDs. UAF registration begins March 27th for our students and ends April 7th, and it will continue after April 7th if we can't get all of our students registered for whatever reason. And that was it for you, for North Star College.
Mr. Dorn?
Okay, I don't know where you want to start with this. I've got a number of questions which I've sent and awaiting answers for. Do you want me to go into those questions now?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so one of the things that I have is in terms of how North Star College is projected to operate with the 180 students. One of those is what's the expectation of students for taking a full 15 credit load?
Those students at North Star College can take a minimum of 7, maximum of 15. It depends on where they're at in their graduation requirements, how we can work some of the classes into their schedule, but really we want to make sure we give them everything that they need for graduation first.
Okay, all right. So if they're taking less than the 15, are they taking other high school classes? And if so, where are they taking those classes?
It will depend on what those requirements are and what they actually need. So our English teacher that we have will be working up at UAF on campus there. So they could take a class or 2 classes with that person. If they need more, then they'll go take some classes at their home school, zoned attendance area school.
And so I guess in addition to that, it would be capped of 2 classes at their home attendance area school. They could also take e-learning classes that our teacher on campus would help facilitate.
Go ahead, Ms. Moretti, and then we'll go back to anyone else who hasn't, doesn't have a question.
Thanks. I just want to clarify for the public that North Star College, due to the increase in enrollment and the size of the school and the newness of it, it is paying, this is actually for Mr. DeGraw, I believe. It is paying for itself. That the district, the proposed budget does not include any additional funds invested into this other than those that are going to be generated from the school itself.
So the proposed budget, new revenue to this FY24 proposed budget covers all new expenditures to this FY24 proposed budget.
Go ahead, Mrs. Dorn, you have an additional question?
Okay, on that point, just staying on that, I do have other questions, but relative to that, the North Star College, I believe is a little over 1.6 million planned expenditure. As a standalone school, it'll generate about 960,000 from the numbers you've given us, and we're already allocating about 350,000 in this year's budget. So we have $300,000 to $400,000 additional amount that needs to go to North Star College.
And yeah, that's a good point, Mr. Dorn. The way those dollars are made up are students, so reduced need for certified teaching staff at the high schools from which they come. So we conservatively estimated 2 to 3 teachers district-wide. Based on actual enrollment numbers, that's a minimum number that would be able to allocate somewhere in the neighborhood of a minimum of 3, possibly 4 or 5. So based on actuals. So.
Okay, so clarification on that. So then my understanding is students will be going back to their home school for taking classes, but we're reducing their home attendance school teachers to address those.
So this might be out of my area of expertise.
This is instructional.
Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. It's not a given that students will be taking 2 classes back at their. That's not set in stone.
So currently, out of our 40 students, we have 5 students that go back to their school and take 1, maybe 2 classes.
Okay. Well, 180. So you anticipate 4 times that 20 students would go
Possibly.
back?
And again, it really depends on what the needs are of the student, where we're at with graduation requirements. And it could be less, it could be a couple more.
All right.
But they're not taking any
I'll
more
just
than
note, I
2.
have concerns about that, but let somebody else go in the queue, and if you come back to me.
Ms. Matheson?
Thank you. Just for clarification, that's any student that's taking any alternative programs that doesn't consist of behavioral can do that, correct?
Correct. Any of our students who are at Best Homeschool or any of our other programs can go back and take up to 2 classes at their zoned school.
Thank you for that clarification.
Mr. Dorn, additional question?
Yes, thank you. One of the questions is in terms of the amount of tuition. I know we're paying full tuition for classes at the university. How does that compare? What's the expected expense on that compared to what we're bringing in? So what are we spending for students for figuring we have to project for 15 credits? Do we have?
I don't have that information in front of me. I'd have to look it up, and I could get back to you on that.
Okay. Thank you. Very good. Okay. I was also wondering, what's the comparative student allocation of counselor to PTR, teacher to PTR, to our regular high schools? Since the university, we're contracting for teachers, they're teaching. So what's our allocations, comparative allocations?
So the counselor allocation would be slightly under, and the teacher allocation would be slightly over if you're just going for a raw number. But the teacher job duties would be slightly different than a typical teacher in a high school setting.
So counselor is 180 for North Star College, and it would be, what are we projected at for, staffed at for the regular high schools?
It's a range, but anywhere from 200, I think, probably up to 275, maybe on the high end at our home attendance area high schools.
Yeah, that's a good range.
Ms. Matheson and then Ms. Marati.
Thank you. I think I need a little more clarification. So we're paying full tuition for 4 classes, for 12 credits, let's say, right? Any additional credits, so let's say we have a student that takes all 15, then would we be paying for 15 credits rather than the 12 credits? Or, okay. And is that negotiable with the university, being that they give different stipulations for exchange students? I don't know if that's negotiable or not, but.
I'm not sure about the different stipulations for exchange students, but the tuition charges to the district have not been negotiable in the past. We do have a yearly MOA that we sign with the UAF that spells out a lot of the contracting talk, but in years past, they have not been open to the conversation about reducing the amount of per credit charges to the school district.
Ms. Marati.
Thanks. I was just going to answer Mr. Doran's question, if I may, through the chair. The page 188 in the budget, it's $950,000 is the increase in tuition for enrollment increase for the North Star College. So that's almost $1 million from the district to UAF.
Mr. Dorn, and then I'll let Ms. Hardy answer her questions.
I'm going to ask, so that's more than what we're generating as a standalone school. Do I understand that then correctly?
So if you're looking at the increase in the foundation formula number was estimated at 960,000. And then when another form of revenue or dollars that can be allocated to North Star College are certified staff that would move with those students. The value of those.
That's a
value.
reduction in staff, right?
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
okay.
So when you add in those dollars, it's going to surpass that $1 million range for tuition.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Hardy.
And I know you guys have provided this before, but it wasn't in the presentation and I don't remember it. How they provide us with a space, but they're also giving us academic counselors or other things, UAF side of the equation. Can somebody, so that we have all that?
So you want to know what UAF is providing for our students?
Remind us.
Yep, so they are providing space. They have also provided some student tutors for our group that are up there. They provide some of the other advising services. They have so much up there. They have started building a new student success center that our students will also have access to, that will give them more access to more tutors, really, because we're trying to give them as much support as possible. They're also providing another staff member to their student rights and responsibilities, that group will help them with the students who are on IEPs, 504s, any discipline issues that we have or that they'll have. Go ahead, Luke. I know you have more than what I have off the top of my head.
They have the dedicated faculty member that's the point of contact on their side for all things North Star College. And then the instructors that are specifically allocated for our cohorted classes.
Okay, Mr. Dorn, are there any new questions other than the ones you sent in your email?
Yeah, yes.
Okay,
And
go
I
ahead.
want to particularly clarify what just came up, or ask a question on it. And I need to preface this with, I'm not against North Star College. Okay, I do have real concerns about it and the trade-offs within our budget. and abilities right now. And I really value the partnership with UAF. Clarification is that what UAF is putting forward is they're putting that forward for their students, because they're getting money for each one of the students. They're enrolled as UAF students. And I'm asking for that clarification, that I understand that. And that the Student Success Center, we have, as any student at UAF has access to, it's not specific investment for this program. And I think they included another one that is general for any UAF student. So we're paying for that through tuition. Am I correct on that?
The Student Success Center, yes. The area that we have that is considered North Star College is our own, that no other students can go into. And I guess I look at it as it's a mutual, there are students and they're their students.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, go ahead, Ms. Moretti.
Again, for Mr. DeGraw, I think in the budget, in the proposed budget, I noticed that North Star College is broken out into two different presentations. So one is for fiscal year, stating that there's nothing in fiscal year 24, and the other one is for fiscal year 24, stating that there was nothing in fiscal year 23. It makes it real weird and confusing. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, it's because we have the budget set up to compare to the prior year. So 499, page 189, that's closing out the budget, the location code 499 for North Shore College with the 40 students where we're currently at right now. And then 550, page 187, is establishing the new school with 180 students. And you can see, like on page 187, for example, there's no comp for the current year there. So it's closing out the existing setup that we have with the 40 students and beginning the new school. That's yeah, a little bit clunky, but that's just kind of the system we have set up when we compare to the prior year. So. And just for clarification, 550, page 187, includes the 359,000 current year FY23 allocation. That's wrapped into the 1.656 of the new school.
Mr. Dorn?
And if I understand correctly from the presentation, the director has been hired. Is that correct? Okay, so that's a cost in this school year, or how is that?
No, that individual won't start until July 1, start of a new
Okay.
fiscal year.
Hired but not
They're hired,
starting?
exactly.
Okay, so the start date is July 1. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Bean, go ahead.
Okay, our CEC overview. 87 actively enrolled students, the 6 staff members. They have facilitate through packet-based instruction. Students come onto the school as needed. They have their graduation rates.
Can you get your presentation? Oh, there we go. Okay, it's coming.
I'm telling you, this doesn't like me. Graduation rates, we have pulled from Dr. Ott, double check this with his dashboard. 21, 22, 28.6%, 2021, 25.6%, and then I listed the number of graduates, plus Mr. Kine gave me the intercession number of graduates that's underneath there. 1920, 29.7, 1819, 27.7%, and then 1718, 42.2%. Intercession, what is intercession? It's for CEC students who have 1 or 2 classes left to graduate. As space permits, students from other schools are also permitted into intercession. Students are expected to attend 2 hours a day, and applications are accepted for the summer program. Intercession is in June, and Mr. Kine can correct me if I'm incorrect in any of this. Intra-session is the credit recovery of their core classes for juniors and seniors. Students can retake any core classes that they have failed in our district, and that's with an F or an NG, which happened a lot during COVID. And they have to have failed with a 40% or higher. Students sign up and complete one course at a time, so once they finish that one course, they're allowed to move on to the next one that they need to work on. Courses must be completed by the timeline set by the teacher from CEC, and they do have limited course offerings, only for courses that they are needed for graduation.
Ms. Matheson?
Mrs. Beam, for the public, you just said that students sign up and complete one course at a time. If they pass the course with, let's say, a C, once they've completed the work that they wanted to complete, can they come back and finish some more in order to get a better grade?
I will let Mr. Kine answer that.
Thank you.
So on that specific question, you're asking about intra-session? Intra-session and inter-session are both designed for graduation progress. They're not designed for anything else. So it's basically designed for students to earn the credit required to graduate. We do not have it set up for students to come in and earn higher grades for classes. Primarily because what we're doing is we're sort of contracting with students. They come in with with sort of an idea of what grade they're looking for, D, C, or B. We've looked at their previous course, and we've sort of targeted work to get to those different grades. And the whole idea is about gathering credit so they can graduate. If they finish one class for intra-session, they can take a second class. We do have kids who repeat it, so this is our third year doing it. We've had kids who've done it multiple years. When it comes to inter-session, again, it's still about earning credit, so classes that are failed, just what they need to graduate. We try to keep it to one or two classes, but we don't usually say no to students if we can find a way to help them get to graduation in June.
You have a follow-up?
And thank you so much for explaining that. And can you tell us roundabouts how many of your students right now have full-time jobs or just don't fit into our high school setting?
So I think it's safe to say that 100% of the students don't fit into the high school setting. So we are designed for students to have gone through high school for 2 years. It used to be 5 semester. The whole idea of CEC is that we are not designed to be a 4-year high school, because we are really about focusing on getting them from where they are and sort of moving them on to graduation. So we don't offer all the same amenities as other schools. So we don't offer dances, we don't offer sports, athletics. Students can participate in those at their home schools if they choose to, but the vast majority of them don't. It's hard for me to actually say exactly how many of them work. When CEC started, it actually did have a work requirement where you actually had to have a job, but that actually has proven over the years to be a barrier to attending because, as you know, young people don't always keep jobs. So many of our students are the types who will work for a while, stop working for various reasons, and then move on. What I can say is that our counselor who processes our work for credit and work-based learning, he does quite a few. The work for credit is really the bulk of our electives when it comes to graduation. What most of the teachers do is the core classes, English, math, science, social studies. But I wish I could tell you exactly how many, but to be honest with you, that sometimes the ones we think are working are no longer working, and the ones who we see every day regularly, and we're like, well, they must not be working, then we find out they have a job. It's just the nature of our students.
I appreciate you explaining that. Thank you.
Ms. Marati?
Thank you. We have as a board, we've spoke in depth about CEC for years, and this is the first time we've had the privilege of having Mr. Kine at the table. So I want to take this time to thank you for being here. It's a privilege. So since you're here, can you tell me Tell me about the wraparound social services that are located near your current location at the, where the CEC is currently located.
So CEC is located just off South Cushman. It's on 27th Avenue. We are located in the backside of the food bank building. The food bank has been our landlord for over 20 years. Actually, the space we're in right now was actually built for us just about 20 years ago. Across the street from us is the Rescue Mission. On the other side of the food bank is the women's shelter. And as I said, we're in the same building as the food bank. Over the years, we certainly have had, I think we average probably, 3 to 4 students a year who come to us from the Rescue Mission. Either they're transitioning out of the Rescue Mission and they come with us, or they're living in the Rescue Mission and they come to school with us. The women's shelter is not something it's a little bit different there. We don't have information on how many students have come from the women's shelter because that's a different sort of environment in terms of it's not information that's shared. But the environment that our students are in, it's South Cushman. They're coming in from North Pole. They're coming from all over the community. That world that is around us is very much a familiar world to many of our students. And if it's not a familiar world, it's a world that many of their friends, family, people they work with sort of know about. As everybody knows, especially in the last several years with COVID, the need for the food bank, the need for the Rescue Mission, other things like that have increased dramatically. It's being in that world has proven to be an important thing for our students to see.
Ms. Moretti, you have a follow-up, and then we'll go back to the presentation.
I do, thank you. If the board were to decide to move CEC to the Nordale Center as proposed by administration, would the CEC students have access? And if not, how would that impact them? Access to those services that you were stating earlier.
It changes that access. No, they wouldn't have access in the same way. We're going to be quite a bit away from that. But at the same time, I can't say that we have a significant number. It's not a majority of our students who access them. In some ways, it's almost educational for them to be in that area. We talk a lot about teachable moments in education. We think about the big teachable moments, 9/11 or things like that, where, they become conversations. But in some ways, being where we're located is a teachable moment when students come in. Some of them are learning about the food bank for the first time. The vast majority of them know about the food bank. There's an interaction with folks, from the Rescue Mission, things like that. It's very much a teachable moment. I can't quantify it in a way that could give you a dollar amount of why it loses value if we move or gains value if we stay there, but we definitely lose something intrinsic to being in that location for our student body. I did have, Ms. Beam, you asked if you mentioned that I could add things or correct things. If I'm not sure if the protocol here, I would like to address some graduation rate issues if anybody would like. I can wait, whatever folks would like.
Ms. Bean, will that be interrupted, or can we have that information?
Mr. Kine provided it through his email earlier. The graduation rates are exactly as he said, 4-year graduation rates. There is a 5-year graduation rate that Mr. Ott is currently working on, and the formula starts at, as they come in as freshmen, these are where our graduation rates are. And when I specifically asked for those, that's what I was given.
Okay, Mr. Dorn, then Ms. Moretti. Ms. Hardy, did you have your?
I have 2 questions, one on the graduation rate and then another one. On the graduation rates, just so I understand the chart correctly, for instance, taking the 21-22 year on slide 7, that means there were 22 graduates. Is that correct?
Yes. A total of 22, yes.
Okay, instead of 10. So it's, okay, and that's at the 4-year, and I'm glad you we're working on getting the 5-year rate, especially
Well,
for a
the
lot of these
4-year is
students.
10, and then I took the 12 that Mr. Kind gave me when I asked him for information. So looking at the slide,
Right?
the 4-year is the 10 graduates, the 28.6%. And then I added 12 graduates from information
So
that Mr. Kind sent.
so in May, there were 10, and then there were another 12 by June, the end of June. So that's 22.
There might have been
22
miscommunication.
graduates, but
So just explain it to me so I know
So
what our total is.
10 of those graduates were within that 4-year cohort. The 12 graduates at Intercession were those from other schools, from CEC, that were past that 4 years. So they could have been 6-year graduates or 5-year graduates.
There may have been miscommunication. So what I can say is, on my chart, we graduated 22 students in May from CEC. In June, we graduated 9 students from CEC, and we graduated 12 district students at the June intercession. So for CEC that year, we graduated 31 students, and according to Dr. Ott's information, 10 of those students would have been 4-year graduates, which means that 21 of those students would be 5th, 6th, and I'd have to look at the names. It's not unusual for us to graduate a 7th. The oldest graduate we've ever had is an 8-year graduate. And so that's what those numbers are, we graduated 10 students as 4-year graduates in that year, apparently.
And then clarification or follow-up, my understanding then is that out of the 31 graduates last year, 21 were 5 or more years graduates, and students come to you, generally speaking, a year or two behind. Is that correct?
So I'd have to look at the numbers. That's one of the things I provided on this, that what we look at is, so for instance, last year, we had 30% of our new students, 37% of those students came to us after their 4th year. So after they were actually able to be a 4-year graduate. And then of our new students last year, 28.4% of them came in what we would consider to be on track, either a junior with at least 12 credits or a 4th-year senior with at least 16.5 credits. It's the nature of our program that every student comes in at the earliest in their 3rd year. We get a significant number in their 4th year, and we actually are one of the few places where we take 5th-year students. That's when they come to us, super seniors or seniors, students who are coming back to the district. So that's the nature of it.
Perhaps, President Sanderson, if, rather than, it seems like there's a lot of variant communication, we could get an updated graduation list with clearer information on all the graduates that are there.
Thank you. I'll take Ms. Hardy and then Mrs. Smith.
Yeah, and this is kind of to Tim, or Mr. Doran's point. If you look at the email Mr. Kind sent us, it included like this chart, which I found to be a lot more informative of what the actual graduation rates are, including one that he left out, which was 19 students were able to walk in May because of the efforts of CEC. So I think that's a far more true representation of what CEC does for our community and does for the students as far as graduation rates, because anyone who's taken statistics knows that statistics are only as good as the numbers and the way you do them. So looking at a 4-year graduation rate for an alternative school that generally does not, accept super seniors, it's not a good measure of what they're doing and what they're providing.
Thank you. Mr. Kind, I was just wondering, I know that you said being in the food bank is immeasurable value, but moving to a different building, that would not be impacting your ability to provide the services that you're contracted to provide to these students just in a different location. So would you say
your graduation rates will be reduced, or the education the students are going to receive are going to be reduced. I know they won't receive that, school of life from being there at the food bank, but overall, your program is materially the same in a different location. Do I understand that?
So Ms. Marati's question was about the geographic location of where we're at. I would say the bigger issue when it comes to what would affect our graduation rate, or what more along the lines of our success rate. So getting kids graduated is just one way we measure success, GED, and just having a positive, even if they drop out, if they have a positive transition back into the world, that's a success to us as well. I think the bigger issue for us is actually how our location is set up. We are sort of set up to be an adult education environment, I like to call it a zero training environment. We have one door. Students arrive to that one door, and we are one giant classroom. Students don't have to navigate, finding multiple doors. They don't have to navigate through hallways to find the specific rooms. They don't have to pass adults who they tend to have a problem. One of the reasons they're with us is because they have a tendency to, say things to adults they shouldn't say sometimes, or if they run into a small barrier, for them it becomes a big barrier. I would say the larger issue for us is that we would be entering an environment that, first of all, is a repurposed elementary school. It has multiple doors. We could have a single entrance, but then it's how do you guide kids to the right entrance, especially when they're coming and going as much as they do. They would have to navigate the hallways to find the right place. At this point, doors are locked at Nordell. Whether that would continue, I don't know. And then, there are issues of, we're talking also about co-locating two programs that are very different, one very structured, one very unstructured. I would say the actual learning space is the bigger concern that we have when it comes to relocating to Nordell.
You have a follow-up, Ms. Smith?
I do have a little follow-up. I understand some of those concerns. And so I actually took the time to go over there to Nordell to start from the door where CEC students would be directed to come into the building. There's only one, and go through that process. Like, I'm a CEC student. I come to this door every day. I go up one stairwell where there are no offices or other adults that I engage. I come to the top of the steps, and there's several classrooms on the right that are the CEC classrooms. So, I don't want to be argumentative, but I do want the public to understand that we're not sending kids over to a little elementary school where they have to check in with the office and see the nurse before they can, go to their class. This is a very adult situation. It's a single entrance, which you have to be authorized to enter. You don't mix in the building with any other students. That's why there are locked doors in that building to isolate the adult students and behavioral issue students. And it's like up the stairs to your class and you're there, and it's the same as CEC, right? Up the stairs to your class and you're there. So you can tell, I'm sure, that I support moving CEC, and I think there are options that don't merge SMART with CEC, and I hope that we're going to look at not one or the other, but some third options. And I think that I think that for me, I support moving CEC to the Nordell location after I spent time there and understand that it is an adult situation. It's not a school, an operating school that kids are going into. So I just don't want that to be misconstrued, that we are sending a bunch of adults to an elementary school for them to navigate through and find their personal area. This area is very simple, and it's available, and I don't find that to be a barrier to the program moving. And the cost savings is an entire FTE. So if we're trying to do what's absolutely best for students, we're trying to put more teachers in more classrooms and spend less money on things that are not teachers in classrooms. So I think that moving CEC is what's best for students. And that's my 2 cents.
Ms. Moratti, and then I have Ms. Hardy. Mr. Dorn.
Through the chair, Mr. Kind, as the expert in students that attend CEC, are most of the students that attend CEC able to be successful in a school site environment?
Traditionally not. I guess one of the ways I look at it, the board is being asked to make tough decisions. There's no doubt about it. There is no one way to do alternative education. There's no one way to do CEC. Looking at what is available in terms of the space, it would require a dramatically different sort of structure to what is done at CEC. CEC is meant to be very open. Mrs. Smith, you mentioned coming to school every day. That's one of the most interesting things about CEC is that students don't come every day. And in fact, as opposed to a traditional school where you sort of have a period at the beginning of the semester or the beginning of the school year where you orient students into what is supposed to happen, where you're supposed to go, how you're supposed to act. CEC students start at all different times, and they enroll at all different times. We enrolled 3 new students today. We were hoping for 4, one didn't show. Since the beginning of the semester, we've enrolled 35, I believe 35 new students. And so one of the things we look at is sort of how we've created this environment where you can walk in the door, you're immediately welcomed, you're immediately guided to where you go. And it removes both the barriers that students cause themselves and the barriers that students respond to. It's just the design. It's what I would consider to be an ideal design for the student body that we have and the model that we have. Removing it means you have to change. We've been in that location for over 20 years. I've been doing it for over 13 years. We've adapted more and more to the physical space that we have, to the point where we look very different than we did at the beginning, but it's very much still about that open space. You walk in, every teacher can see you. You walk in, you can see every teacher. You can't hide from your teachers. You can't find a way to sort of put a barrier in front of you, or you can't run into a barrier that others put in front of you. It's designed that very specific way. There would be impacts. I can't quantify them in a dollar value, and we are in an environment where you're having to quantify things in dollar values, and I wish I could tell you, I'm going to get you X number of students, and I'm going to get you X number of dollars. I can't do that. What I can say is that, in my experience, the types of students we have take what we as adults would consider to be minor barriers, and they become large barriers. And we've seen that happen. We see that happen all the time.
Ms. Moratti?
Thank you. And since we're giving our opinions tonight, I don't support moving CEC due to the location that it's being proposed to be moved to, and the CEC students don't thrive in school site environments. And it's been proven that they do thrive in the current location, and we can't put a price tag on our most vulnerable students. This location works, and I support CEC staying where it is. And as someone that has worked in the area that CEC is, I can see the building from my office for over a decade now. I can attest that the students use the services around CEC and at times live in the services around CEC, and I see it as a barrier. If we move them, if we move the location, those students will not be able to access CEC. So I can see graduation rates dropping. That's my prediction, and I don't want it to be true. So I'm in favor of it staying where it's at.
And I just want to remind the board members that we are digesting information tonight, so I appreciate everybody's patience with that. Ms. Hardy?
Yeah, so, and part of this is going to slightly talk about SMART, because I don't think with the way it's been presented, we can separate the 2 issues. And I actually agree with a lot of things that Mrs. Smith has said, especially in the support of CEC. and the SMART program. They're both extremely beneficial programs for our district, and they have very different missions. And I went to both programs as well and had looked, and so like SMART services middle schoolers all the way through high schoolers. So we already have that issue of different age groups. And I know for SMART, a big benefit was having the gym at Nordale. And I talked to them about how nice it was to move out of this admin center and go to a place where they could have those services. That's a big part of their day, is getting out and getting to move, especially students. Like both of these schools have very similar to students that were my bread and butter as a special education teacher that kind of struggled and were on the fringes. And that movement is huge for the population that goes to SMART. So I think that place is a really good place for them. I was very happy that they landed there. But we also, because of those schools, they have conduct issues. They're there because they were expelled from our district, so the locked doors make a lot of sense. That's a requirement to keep these students safe, to make sure that the staff that's there is safe and able to deal with their unique needs, where those needs aren't the same for CEC. Those students aren't conduct problems. They are just students who are not successful in traditional high schools. So, to Ms. Smith's point, the walking up and going around, that would be great if that were the only program there. Then sure, we could walk up and they'd have space and maybe it would be slightly different, but we're not proposing that. We're proposing combining two programs. How do we let SMART meet its needs of having the gym and having the thing? I think that's a very appropriate placement for SMART with the locked doors, and then make that, we're trying to say, oh, we'll figure it out. It doesn't work well. We can't combine the two programs and say that we're not going to lock doors, that we're not going to share staff. It doesn't work out on paper. So we're taking pieces and saying, well, this will be okay for CEC and this will be okay for SMART, where nothing's going to be really okay for either of them if the proposal is to combine them. There has to be a third option. And I think a lot of people have said if we're moving CEC to a place that we're better for CEC, we could all get down with that. But SMART is occupying that space. Are we going to move them out of there? Are we going to say that now CEC is moving here, but SMART moves back down to the place where we can lock doors and give them the support that they need? You know, how do we give the program that needs the structure, while giving the program that needs the freedom in the same building, in the same small space?
Thank you, Ms. Hardy. I have Ms. Barnett, and then I would love to allow Ms. Bean to present the rest of her slides, if we could hold our questions.
Just quickly, maybe this is for Mrs. Beam. I'm just hearing a lot of concern over locked doors and flexibility. Is that something that we could work through? Could key access for the CEC students, or something like that?
So our locked doors are at the hallways. And I have said before, I don't think anybody really listened, that that's just current. That does not mean that that has to be that way next year. We have it that way this year because it was all new. It's a learning experience for us too. I wish there could be a third option of CEC coming over and maybe keeping those two things separate, or adding a tutor, as I talked to one of our prevention specialist in SMART, and she said that she thought we could be successful with having a tutor, and maybe if she has a student who needs some academic help, taking them down to CEC if they were there, so they could get some academic help, and then taking them back. So I'm hoping there are other options. It's tough, and I can tell you it's really rough. I'm not making any friends. Nobody is happy with me, and I wish there were some money to come in and everybody could be happy, but that's not the case right now. We're trying to save money, and if this is the way to do it, then, and I have said to several board members, it's your decision. Whatever you decide, I wholeheartedly support. And again, I know it's not easy, but I will do whatever I need to do. And if you tell me that we're going to move CEC over there, I will make it happen, and I will make sure that we're all safe and that the students are learning. we can be flexible, because like I just said, it's a learning experience this year. If we need to move things around a little bit, then we'll move things around. There's nothing that's written in stone that says this is the absolute way that things have to be, just because they're that way this year. I'm sorry.
Ms. Bean, would you please go ahead with your presentation?
Okay, now on to our SMART program. Currently we have 4 students in there. We have one that is transitioning back to his school tomorrow, which is a huge loss for us. He brought tears to my eyes today because I brought him pizza and stuff. So anyway, we have a teacher, a counselor, a prevention specialist, and a tutor. That position is currently unfilled. We have students who are there for a minimum of 10 days, 10 days, and we have students who are there for a year. It depends on if they're there for a long-term suspension or if they have been expelled.
I'm just making sure I'm on the right one.
Okay. We facilitate online classes. We have an English teacher who helps them with their English classes. We did have a tutor who helped with science and math. We provide counseling sessions with the prevention specialist and with our counselor. They have some SEL, they have life skills and other type of classes. So when they transition back into the school that they came from, that they'll be successful. The purpose of SMART is to allow students to continue working on academics while receiving group and individual counseling from a counselor or from the prevention specialist. And I want to add to this that we have had some students who have said the academic piece is not why they're there. They are there to receive counseling, and we had one student who his mom has called us repeatedly over the last several weeks to say she doesn't care about academics at all. She wants her student to receive the counseling and the prevention strategies while we're there. Because according to her, he can make up those academics at another time, but she wants to make sure that we continue with the prevention specialist and or counseling. Our strategies are to make sure that the students learn how to make good decisions, which is why they came, because they made a poor choice, and we want to make sure that they learn how to make a good choice and learn how to control tempers for those who got into fights or whatever reason brought them there. The staff interacts daily with students from 7:30 to 2, and it is voluntary. Students who get expelled or who are on long-term suspension do not have to attend SMART. It's a choice that the parents make with the students, and we have some students who their parents leave that choice up to them, and the student says, no, I don't want to go there, and they go home, or some of them go to other homeschool programs. And this is the proposal. This was the original proposal, to have 7 staff members. Students attending SMART will report to the CEC office or classroom on a daily basis, and I think just from what we have just gone through, that does not necessarily have to be the case. Those students, SMART students, can report down to the SMART area, which would be 2 classrooms as I see it, and the rest of that floor upstairs would be for CEC. And again, I think CEC would enhance with their academics for our students who need it in whichever area it is that they need it. But it is not going to be on a full-time basis. The prevention specialist will work with students one-on-one and in small groups. And again, we're working on those transition skills to get them back to school so they can be successful. So we hope that we do not see them again in SMART. And both SMART and CEC students have access to a district-wide SSM, that's the social worker, and they currently share the same person. So I have asked that she have an office over at Nordale next year when we hire a new person for that position. Our one who is in that position currently, Diana Dillard, has accepted another position as the discipline and policy specialist for the school district. So she's going to work with us to see what she can do to make sure that whoever fills that position will be at Nordale on a part-time basis. And there's ample space for CEC and SMART. We'll work with Mr. Kind, and the staff at CEC, along with Val, who's our prevention specialist, to create a plan that works for everybody. We're not assuming anything. We want everybody's input to make it a successful transition. And I'm going to add the flexibility here. Currently, we have the building, and again, it's because of those people that are in the building. It opens at 8, it closes at 4. That doesn't mean, again, that's written in stone. If it needs to open at 7, it will open at 7. If it needs to close at 6, it can close at 6. Moving, CEC's lease ends June 30th. I don't know if it's possible to have an extension that runs through July so we can have the moving piece in place. CEC and staff would box up their supplies and put them on pallets to be moved. SMART would do the same thing with their 2 people who would be moved. And they would hire temporary employees with FMD and then coordinate the move with Ms. Gray so we could move A&E and the Alaska room. That's it. And I know there will be many more questions.
Ms. Moretti?
I want to start by commending the district, specifically Ms. Beam and the SMART team for the work that they do through SMART. As board members, we see many students that go through the SMART program, and many of them have asked to stay at SMART, even though they're no longer eligible because of the benefits they find there. This board has talked about expanding access to SMART so more students can find themselves eligible can attend SMART. This program is very successful, and I, for one, don't want to fix something that isn't broken. I have a question. You mentioned there's 5 to 10 students, but didn't quite quantify how that was measured. Is that average number of students per year?
So that's what we've had over this year. We've had anywhere from 5 to 10 students, and currently we have 4.
So how many, but the students come and go, so how many students have benefited from SMART, say this year and last year?
Last year we had 11 total. This year we've had approximately 12, I believe.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Harding, then I'd like to put myself in the queue.
Just because we had talked about providing a van to SMART to get students there, is transportation, since you're here to speak on it, an issue for students attending? Like, could that increase the amount of students who access SMART?
It could. We have one student who was not able to attend because of transportation, and that was one student this year. Last year, all of our students who wanted to come did come.
For any students that are expelled or long-term suspension in the North Pole area, that has traditionally been a challenge for those families as well. And so a van coming from North Pole, I do think would expand access to SMART.
So, Ms. Bean, my question is, and I'll get you, Ms. Moretti. Say a student was in SMART, and they came out of SMART, and they were ready to go back to school. They said, but, I kind of want to do that CEC thing. Would that be possible?
Yes. Our counselor and prevention specialists have actually reached out to Mr. Greek over at CEC with other questions and other students. I think we've had a couple that have transitioned over to CEC in the past.
Ms. Moretti?
Thank you. To expand on Mrs. Hardy's question about the van, and then Mr. Meinard's agreement that it would expand access, is there a van plan for SMART? I know I've been talking about it for a couple years now.
I don't know that there's an official van plan for SMART yet. Our vans are still in progress. However, I will say next year, starting the beginning of the year, we should have some more concrete pieces in place. So, van plan for SMART is in the works, but nothing concrete yet.
Mr. Dorn?
I'm going to start with the SMART program. Okay. I am interested in the history of student enrollment there. I think we should have that. If you could answer this question, we have had, the SMART program has actually, for a number of years, we've talked about how do we increase it? How do we provide more room for more student services and needs? This is basically doing away with it. And so I'm concerned how all of a sudden we wound up with a 180 on this is something we need to further develop to be basically, it's a minimal piece.
So just so I'm understanding your question, you were talking about expanding SMART?
Yes, there have been multiple conversations over the years looking at SMART as something that we need to look at how do we expand its abilities to meet the needs of students, and that all of a sudden we're now at a 180 on that.
So
Have less services for those students.
I'm not sure we're reducing services for students. We're providing the same services. Am I correct in saying that? We're not reducing any services for the students at SMART. So we're staying consistent with that level of service.
Can I do a follow-up?
Go ahead, Mr. Dorn.
So we're cutting staff from 4 currently to 1, who will be the counselor, am I correct? That's the one that stays.
The prevention specialist.
Prevention specialist stays. And that person will provide since we do know the counseling piece is a major, that buildings, the piece of understanding is, if we want to talk SEL, social, emotional, and when we have students who have come before us to a student, they stress the techniques they've learned, the other pieces, yes, they did better academically because their other needs were being addressed. And we know that a trauma or any emotional issue for a student impacts their ability to learn. They've been consistent in learning those skills and saying what they've learned with the intent of getting back into their home school. Sometimes they've gone elsewhere. And I remember students who came specifically and said, I think I'm better off going to CEC.
So those strategies that you're talking
services
about
are
are going to
not
be
there.
provided by the prevention specialist.
And that one
And
person
she is
can
staying.
provide all of that for the students.
She is.
To the same level as we have now,
Correct.
but we don't have the counseling.
The counseling we're going to share with CEC. If the board chooses to vote that way, yes. The counseling piece was added about 3 years ago now. My brain might be a little foggy there. Because prior to 4 years ago, there was no counselor. And then we've gone through 2 years of COVID, where 1 year we had no students in CEC. The next year we had 5 students in CEC. So that counseling piece that you've heard about all along has been with the prevention specialist, and she is staying.
Okay, with no other supports.
Well,
Effectively.
with the counselor from CEC supported, again, if you vote that way, yes.
Okay, all right. Could I do another question, different topic?
I'm going to let Mrs. Smith ask her question, then I'll come back to you.
Thank you. So, Mrs. Beam, what we're doing with that, combining the programs, or the change that is proposed, is really about 4 FTEs, right? And so I think we talked, and I've talked to other people, that it seems to me, this is just throwing it out there, that another option is to maintain the SMART program, share the prevention specialist and counselor with CEC, and, sorry, Mr. Kind, but reduce some of the FTE at CEC. And then we're going to have to deal with finding, say, the other 2 FTE that we're going to have to reduce somewhere else. So it's a lot to ask from one program, CEC, to move, to take on a whole other thing, to do all of these changes at once. But if we can scale it back and say, can you move and share a counselor and get used to this space and see how that's working? And SMART has already gone through that transition. Their program just seems to be working. They have sort of a minimal staff, especially if they're going to share the counselor prevention specialist. And I just really think that materially changing 2 entire programs over basically 2 FTE is not what's going to be best for those programs or those students. And that we can all dig deep here and find 2 FTE somewhere. I mean, I'm willing to really think outside the box on this, wherever they need to come from. And if non-classroom people need to take more onto their plate, I mean, we need to keep our student contact programs intact. And I know that in the downtown is where the teachers get their support from. But I feel like there's got to be something else that's not going to really rock the world of, like Ms. Marati said, the students who are extremely vulnerable. There's a lot of vulnerable students in our district right now, but we can ask something of CEC. I don't think it has to be everything. And we can ask something of SMART, and I don't think it has to be everything. And I'd really like to see a proposal that asks something of both programs and not everything, and find something else somewhere else.
I have Mr. Dorn and then Ms. Marati, and I'll put myself in the queue.
To the goal of SMART, am I correct in my understanding that SMART students, when they come, their goal is to get back into school? Our goal for them is to get them back into their regular school. CEC's goal is to get them to graduation. I'm correct on those things. So
Yes.
they're very, very different.
Yes.
Okay. And to the administration, on the slide talking about the proposal logistics, it's right here. We talk about ample space for CEC and SMART, but am I also correct that I'm reading this? We are moving programs out of the education center in order to make room, so there's not room now. We'd have to make room, and I'm looking at A&E moving out and Best losing some rooms.
No, it would, not from the building. A&E may move from where they would stay in the building. Or no, they would.
It's a possibility that A&E would move. Ms. Gray and I have had several conversations about that, and when we moved A&E over into that location last year, it was a potential temporary move for them, and so they were ready to move elsewhere if need be.
So to A&E, they were kind of temporary to begin with, but no one else is moving from the building that is there now. SMART is there now, they'll stay in the building. Best is there, they'll stay in the building. So A&E is the only one that might, and they were kind of temporary to start with. Mr. Minor?
There's also some additional space upstairs that's made because of e-learning teachers moving out because of the reduction in the size of our e-learning program next year.
Okay, and are there best classrooms upstairs too, right?
There are
They've
no
been
best.
changed. They were there, they were pointed out to me at the beginning of the year.
We have one office that they have moved upstairs because they didn't have enough room downstairs, but that was an office for their ELL tutor.
Thank you. I do have a question regarding CEC. We did not get to.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Dorn.
Okay, thank you. I've really appreciated this conversation because we've highlighted the successes of CEC, 1,700 graduates. And what's interesting is the last couple of years, providing graduates, enabling graduates for our other high schools, which is what we want to do, a graduation rate, and its effort to reduce our dropout rate. With that in mind, there are two things that I would like, if I might, through the administration, Mr. Kine, to maybe address. If you could talk about the partnership that exists with the food bank, and I'm thinking particularly in relation to the fact that it was in 2003, sitting in this room, the school board at that time in the budget was ready to cut some significant alternative programs. And because students came and spoke, they didn't. The following year, then Superintendent Ann Short initiated the idea of putting together a charter school. So there was a real partnership, and we've continued to talk about the partnerships in our community. If you could address that partnership, and also, I'm going to reference them as invisible students. They're the ones that we often don't see, that are out there, and we need to meet their needs. If you wouldn't mind addressing both aspects of that.
So the, excuse me, the partnership goes way back with the food bank. Sam Kirstencastle, the former executive director, tells great stories about how when she was approached about bringing an alternative program into her building, she immediately said, no, we can't bring those kids into the building. And then she got to know the kids. And then of course she had to introduce that idea to her board. And so then she had, 9 people who had the same response. The food bank has been a partner all along. And it costs money, and I get that. When we're trying to prioritize, I understand the prioritizing of teachers and ESSA staff and folks in front of students. I truly get that. The partnership with the food bank, it goes way back. The lease that we have now has never been increased except by our request. Our rent has been the same for 20-some years. They've never increased it. $80,000 for what we get. It's a pretty good deal, especially when you compare it to what other landlords charge for various charter schools and other buildings. The only increase we've ever had is when we needed some storage space upstairs. The food bank has also been an important partner with us in terms of providing support for our students, providing food boxes. We actually have a fairly sort of streamlined process when students need to go over to provide them, sort of get them moving with food boxes and things like that. In terms of, my day-to-day dealing with things over the years, one of the things we look at is we have some of the best snow removal in the district coming from the food bank. But again, I understand that, if it's money to be saved, I see why you're looking to save it. One thing, Mr. Doran, when you talk about sort of invisible students, I know that many folks have wondered. I see we have some technical issues going on here. Power is important, I understand. Anybody who's ever been in here for a principal meeting knows how valuable the surge protector is. I get it. One last one. Oh, I think Ms. Matheson needs, Mr. Alwyn, I think Ms. Matheson needs to be plugged in as well.
Go ahead, Mr. Kine.
So this is my first time speaking to you, sort of publicly answering questions. And I know that there have been requests to hear from parents, to hear from students. I know that oftentimes when you are dealing with cuts at schools, you often hear very directly from students and parents. Typically, those students and parents you hear from are, AP parents, our honors students, and things like that. I think one of the things that we would ask you to consider is just that you may not be hearing from students, you may not be hearing from parents, but it's kind of the nature of CEC students. It's kind of the nature of CEC families. We argue vehemently as staff because we feel it's important to advocate for our students. Not a, if it is necessary, if the board would like to hear from more parents and students, we have not at this point in time shared much with our students about this because our students kind of, they lead complicated lives. Our parents lead complicated lives. We don't feel it's our place to put this on them unless that's something you absolutely need to hear. Our goal is always to advocate for a certain type of student that is kind of ignored. We have a lot of great services in this district at the upper end, AP and honors, and we have a lot of great services at the other end, with special education and things like that. We're kind of the program that's there for that sort of massive middle. And when we can find a way to serve sort of that middle group of students, we find ways. That is why years ago when we were looking at, my predecessors, when they were looking at, how they could help the district, that's where the idea of intercession came up. We were looking for a way to stay open for our students, but we also were looking at groups of students we know whose lives were complicated by not graduating in May. So that's where the intercession came up. We've looked over time at ways to help the district. It was very easy for us when we had an application requirement that was 14 credits. But we started to see that we were saying no to way too many students who had no other option. So we brought it down to 12, and then, which, wasn't too difficult, but then we brought it down to 8. So we're bringing in kids who are essentially sophomores by credit. But we're the only ones sort of in a position to help them, so we brought that down. Same thing when we looked around and we saw during COVID, and we were hearing stories that, semesters in a quarter was going to be very difficult for students. We asked ourselves, well, how can we help? And so that's where we came up with intrasession. And when we saw how well we could do with intrasession, we said, hey, we could probably expand our June intrasession by bringing in more students. We look around for the types of students, for students who need help, who need something. And so we find ways to help that sort of massive middle of students who don't have a lot of formal services for them. And we use the resources we have, the teachers we have, the physical space we have to find ways to serve those students. All I can say is as I look forward and look at a program like SMART, which I don't understand. I have no experience in SMART. The folks out there in the audience have more experience with SMART than I do. I don't know how I put them together as a head teacher. I don't know how I do it in that physical space without having some impact on what we do. If I saw it, I would be pushing for it, because that's what we've done all along. I got a couple of staff members out there who will tell you various times, we've all said, let's do this. And they're like, wait a minute, is that serving our core students? So, but we find ways to do more with the resources we're given. We don't make a lot of money for the district. We've saved some money over the years. Last year we cut a position. All we can find ways to do is be more valuable. I don't at this point in time see how this plan makes us more valuable serving the students we do. I don't even know if I answered your question, Mr. Dorn.
No, you didn't.
So if I could just add to what Mr. Kine said. First of all, the idea of invisible students, I get what you're saying, but they're not invisible to CEC. So while they may not be seen, even be seen at the CEC complex, they're not invisible. And secondly, I would say there's nothing that precludes a partnership with the food bank if we move to a different location. That partnership can continue if it's food boxes, if it's regular drop-off, if it's whatever. That partnership can move forward no matter where the program is located, because that's a partnership. We have partnerships, we have food pantries in elementary schools all over the district. And like Mr. Kine said, we can find a way to make that partnership work. So those two things, I just wanted to add that the partnership can continue, and there are not invisible students, even if they don't show up and physically, they're seen by the CEC staff.
I think I
Just
was
finish. Go ahead.
So, a few minutes ago, you were talking about the support staff and the intervention prevention specialist that's there. So both of these programs are very familiar to me. I've had to utilize them, since '93. That's when I actually went in the classroom. And I'll just say on preference, my comments by saying, the dedication, that's not even on the table, because we understand when I first got into the classroom and got into special ed, the name I heard more than any name was Missy Gordon. If you did not understand SPED, if you did not understand your parental rights, if you did not understand the program, or if the program wasn't working for you, you knew to go to Missy, and Missy would be able to say, look, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to ask for. This is how that student needs to be serviced. So over 30 years of her dedication, her expertise, and all the things that she's brought to this district, they're invaluable. A lot of students, a lot of teachers, a lot of programs probably wouldn't have lasted as long as they have lasted, but for her knowledge and expertise. I don't know Mr. Kine as much as I know Missy, so it's not that I'm leaving you out, Mr. Kine, but it's just I know that was the name. And for as smart, Miss Valerie Majors, we've had, as a board member, we've had students come before, and every student will say, Miss Majors said this, Miss Majors taught me that, Miss Major gave me these skills. And so because of what she comes from, and because of her longstanding with the SMART program, she's one of the still originals that were mentored under Montine Jackson. And she's gone on for higher education and skill set. And the expertise and knowledge that Valerie Majors brings to the SMART program is another reason why we have success. So we celebrate those successes, and we look for the ways that we can still service our students. There have been a number of students in my years that I have sent to CEC because I didn't want them to come back to the regular school, because I knew they wouldn't make it if they came back. So a partnership, I can see it working. It may be uncomfortable, but when with the strong people that you have, like Miss Gordon, Miss Valerie Majors, I believe everybody on this board, we want to do what's absolutely best. We are not trying to push anything. We are really looking for an alternative. We're looking for the best practice that will support our students and give them the best foundation to continue to succeed. And we just find ourselves in this ridiculous situation of funding. And this afternoon, 4 board members were able to have a meeting with legislators. But the legislative and the atmosphere right now for funding, I do believe that because they've had to hear from more students than they have ever had to hear from in their entire career, the older ones, the newer ones, it's a kind of a new thing for them. But our students are telling us what we need, and so that's what we have to listen to those things, and then we have to come up with the most creative way that we can provide those services to our students so that they can find success. I'll end my comments, and I think Ms.
May I make a quick comment, if you wouldn't
Sure,
mind?
Mr. Kine.
And I appreciate, we've been working with Ms. Sanderson since she was over at North Pole High, and so we truly appreciate that. I just would like to caution, and this is something I remember, I believe Ms. Herbie said this at a presentation several work sessions back, of how your department works because you have 2 people with a specific skill set. It's very important, I think, that when we think about alternative education, we think about it being sustainable. And when we look at it, if we're looking at it based on specific individuals who are going to be moving forward and filling specific roles, we have to be very careful, because we have to remember that those people aren't always with us. You know, Missy Gordon's been around for a long time. Eventually, she's got to retire. I myself, this is my 21st year. Transitions, things happen. My goal has always been with CEC to set things up to be sustainable when I'm gone. And so when I look at this plan and I look at all the different possibilities and all the different permutations, there's so much up in the air with such a short time frame to figure it out. Could we figure it out? Maybe. The question is, who's going to still be here, when fall rolls around? Who's going to be here when the next school year rolls around? Is it going to be sustainable after a retirement, after a family, a need to make a change, that type of thing? That's where my concern lies when we look at alternative education, because we serve a population that needs more consistency than others in some ways. We have a lot of consistency behind the scenes, so our students don't have to be consistent. And when I look at what is put forward sort of as a plan, that's where my concern is. Is it doable? Do I see what is in front of us? Do I see opportunities? Do I see something that's sustainable moving forward? And so I would just caution when we think about making major changes, is it sustainable to move forward?
Ms. Moretti, and then I have Ms. Barnett.
What? Through the chair, in response to what Mr. Doran said about the reduction in services to SMART students, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like SMART students are going to go from one counselor for 5 to 10 students to one counselor for 92 students. We're combining SMART and CEC, and they have to share one counselor. And then through the chair, also in response to what Mrs. Smith said, CEC already reduced their FTE last year in order to stay at their current location. That's how much they value their location. And then lastly, Mrs. Moline often says we are a partnering institution. So if locked doors next year are not necessary for SMART, like Ms. Beam said, if I got that correct, could SMART move to CEC's location, thus providing more services for students through the partnership with the food bank already established? So option 3.
Ms. Barnett.
I'd just like to backtrack for just a minute to Mr. Kind. You brought up the board having asked a few times, we'd like to hear from some of the students. I'd like to put that back out on the table. We would definitely love to hear from the students. I really do appreciate you being here. I appreciate Ms. Gordon showing up and how much you guys really do care and love what you do and where you're at and how it all works. I really do truly appreciate that. But my big concern is the students. And so I would like to hear from them. If we could make that happen, they could come to a board meeting and speak for their 2 minutes. They could send us an email. That would be really awesome.
I would say the email would be more comfortable for a lot of our students because coming before a meeting is rather challenging, even for some of us.
Absolutely, thank you.
Ms. Hardy.
Yeah, a couple things, and to speak to something Mr. Kind said about who's left and who's actually going to implement the things that this board decides. That's an important piece to keep in mind. Coming from special education, we say that we can put services in place, we can put accommodations, but you can't put a person, because sometimes it's like this one person that makes this child's world go round and they're successful, and when that person's not there, everything falls apart. And that's the same type in this situation. We're working right now because we have a particular set of skills, like Ms. Herbie said, within a department or that makes it work, but we already know that we've lost some people from both of these programs because of decisions that are even just possibly happening. So keeping that in mind as a board, just because we make this decision does not guarantee the staff that is currently in place will be in place next year to implement whatever decision we have. And that's because people have the right to move and do other things. So we need to remember that we can't just hope that these very qualified and capable people are going to be around when we're ready to do that decision. And I know, like, anytime someone's been somewhere for a long time, sometimes that's a two-person job to fill than just a one person, because they've been there so long. They have such a breadth of knowledge. They bring so much, and it becomes a much harder position when we're filling it. And then completely switching gears, because you had mentioned that the CEC lease is $80,000. So, but in the budget presentation, it says that it's $120,000 with related custodials. Have we approached at any point saying we've been a long partner for 20 years, what can we negotiate on the lease given the school district's limited finances right now that could allow CEC to stay where they are if this food bank finds this a beneficial relationship and this is something important to CEC? Have we approached anything there or asked for donations or grants in some way if that's such a core piece of CEC to make it possible?
You were looking at me, I assume the question's for me. No, we have, I mean, so literally the lease we have is the one we've had for 25 years. We have not approached them about changing anything. You know, I think it's 83,000 or 84,000 is the total with the upstairs. The additional money is custodial services. I think when we started, as you know, looking at changing CEC and cutting or moving CEC, we had significantly more custodial services because I think during COVID there might have been a requirement that custodians came in more often. I can say right now that the custodial services, we have somebody who comes in and it's about 6 hours a week. There's been a few times where it's been 8 or 9, but you know, I can't speak to how much that is in terms of an FTE, but you know, it is, I think part of the issue, you know, I certainly am not in a position to negotiate with the food bank asking for less because right now the only thing I've been told is no lease or a lease. If that was something that the board wanted to look into to save some money, then that would be, I don't know if it's me who talk, I mean, I have a good relationship with them, so I certainly could talk with them. It seems like that's, you know, a little above my pay grade. You know, I'm just a teacher, guys. I get paid a little extra. You know.
Ms. Coryell, can you shed any light on that for us?
So for the custodial services, we provide a 0.3 FTE, and that person is split with Hunter Elementary. There was a situation over COVID where they did have to come in 5 times a week, and every now and again there might be some things that Mr. Kind or somebody over there, if they have something going on in the evening, we may support that. So we do provide a 0.3 FTE.
Thank you. Mr. Durham, then Ms. Marati.
Thank you. The question that really is there is we have 2 good programs that have been very successful and have gone through numerous transitions of personnel over their existence and have done that successfully. With CEC at the moment, what we're talking about is a dollar amount that is 5/10,000ths of a percent of our budget, 0.0005. So it's a very, very small amount. Looking at benefits to students. The other question I have is in terms of SMART. I really appreciate Mr. Kind being here to explain and fill us in on some information. Ms. Mullane, you had mentioned that Valerie Majors was here and also prepared to, and I would like to ask then if she's got something to share with us that would help us understand the SMART program in a fuller light.
Yeah, she was not able to join us. So if you have like specific questions, generally we can answer questions about SMART, but if you have specific questions for her, then we can try to get those to her, but she wasn't able to make it tonight. we do have smart teachers here.
Well,
Um,
I'd
Do
be
you have
open to-
specific questions
to
about the
hearing
program?
their
Do
unders-
do you have specific questions about the program? Is that what
Well,
you're?
one of my questions is similar we've had with Spintakine. What is the impact of this in terms of they know their students best, they've been working with them, and we're
So you guys can do rock, paper, scissors and decide who gets to come up and talk. But we invite you to join us here at the table, maybe here by Miss Matheson.
And if they're,
Oh.
and I would say if they're not, then if
All
they're
right.
not comfortable doing that,
All right.
we could have Valerie come.
I don't want to
next
put you
time.
guys on the spot, but if you're comfortable taking the spot, then. Okay, Mr. Kind is gonna. Oh, it looks like they're gonna sit over there.
So in debating who was going to come up, I didn't hear the question, but I'm Michelle Coriel. I'm the counselor at the SMART program.
And I'm Heidi Kristovich. I'm the teacher of the SMART program.
So if you could repeat that question you wanted us to answer. I believe it was, how do the students benefit from the SMART program?
Yes, and what's the impact of the proposed change? So it's what you're doing now, and what's that impact?
Well, currently our counselor works with the students 5 days a week. So they have groups and one-on-one counseling 5 days a week. That would no longer be possible with the proposed change. Miss Allen, she's going by Allen now, she is wonderful, but she's prevention and intervention specialist, not a counselor. So the counseling piece would actually be removed from the SMART program under this proposal. The one-on-one teaching that I provide for the students would no longer be possible with this proposal. The relationships would change. It would be more of a babysitting job, you know, just corralling the kids, keeping them kind of like contained. But kind of those one-on-one relationships would naturally have to go. I was also thinking, Craig, about your comment about like eighth-year seniors coming in. And I guess the natural question I have is, how do we have 12-year-olds with 8-year like seniors, possible 22-year-olds? So I'm not sure if you guys have thought about how you're going to mix those two programs while keeping the vulnerable 12-year-old away from, you know, the 21, 22-year-old, especially in a program that they really shouldn't be mixing anyway. So the SMART students actually have confidentiality. They have a right to confidentiality. And if they want to, you know, the district needs to think about how are you going to keep them entirely separate, because the CEC students cannot be mixing with the expelled and the suspended students.
I think too, I guess, in my experience with the school district, I'm a licensed special education teacher for 20 years. I'm a counselor. I'm highly qualified in science and English. I can deliver a lot to our students, and I do. Again, Miss Allen's been there for a long time. She's the prevention and intervention specialist, but cutting that program down to one person, I echo exactly what Ms. Kristovich says. It's a babysitting job. Our students will not get the services they get now. They won't. And if you want to say that the CEC counselor can do all of that, okay, then say they will deliver that to 90 people plus. And if we did get a bus or a van to deliver our students who can't come, we do have one that doesn't come currently who was enrolled due to transportation, but there have been multiple students who don't come because they can't get a ride. That's just one student who was enrolled who no longer comes because he couldn't get a ride. So if we did have transportation for all of we could have 32 students this year. For whatever reason, they're not all there. If they did all show up, is Miss Allen, what will she be doing with them in a room all day? She can't do groups. She can't do one-on-ones. She can babysit. I don't know how she'll walk down the hall to get help from a gen ed teacher in the CEC program when she's the only staff in the room. When you say that this program will be the same, it will not. When you say they'll still benefit, I can't see it being possible. What they have now and what they had before me, I can't speak to. I can tell you what they have now. They have rigor, they have structure, they have love, they have predictability, they have what they need to be successful. They get their credits to go back to school. And yes, Mr. Doran, our goal is to get them back into school, but our goal is to also make sure they have a chance to graduate. Our goal is to make sure they understand that they mean something, that graduating means something, because a lot of them I don't see the benefit. They don't see what's the point? They understand. They realize there's hope. They realize there's post-secondary outcomes that they can be a part of. That's not just sitting at home, playing video games, who knows? They know they can be something bigger. And it's because of the program we have now.
And I think sometimes when we talk about money, it's very easy to kind of forget the people that are represented by that money. So it's easy to balance the budget kind of on the backs of the most vulnerable because they don't throw a fit. You know, the parents are not going to come and scream at you. The kids are not. They just don't have the parents to do that. And so the number one thing that makes the program successful is the relationship that the students develop with Ms. Coriel, myself, and Ms. Allen. And there really is only 3 of us. We've never had a full-time tutor, and we currently don't have a tutor at all. So there's really 3 of us in the program making daily connections, and this is often the very first time any of these kids have ever had a positive relationship with any adult. It's life-changing for them. It's life-changing for them, and I struggle to see how the CEC teachers will be able to manage their 90 caseload, all the classes they teach, all of the grading that they do, and continue to create valuable and meaningful and life-changing relationships with the SMART students. Unfortunately, the logical outcome of this is that the SMART students will be forgotten, and it's easy to do because when you look at the numbers, oh, it's only 10. Okay, I mean, that's certainly one way to look at it.
My question for you is the confidentiality piece. Can you expound on that? Well, the students are either expelled or on long-term suspension. We don't release their names to anybody else, so they would be commingling with other students in the district and staff. Our program is also top-heavy in students with special needs. That's another confidentiality piece. But
Sorry, they're not supposed to mingle. So one of the they're not allowed on campuses. They can't go to school dances. They can't go to sporting events if it's on a campus. So they're not supposed to be mingling on a campus with any other students in the district. And so I'm not sure how you would avoid that with CEC taking over SMART.
Thank you for your comments and for sharing your information with us. Mr. Matheson?
So they're not supposed to attend activities, and how do we monitor that? Because it's after school. I mean, I've never turned away any student that comes to the gate and has their $2 or however much it costs to come in. So how do we monitor that? And then FERPA is, I mean, it's district-wide. So I just need clarification on those concerns. Oh,
I'll answer the gate piece. Usually we rely on our administrators who are out at the schools because they're the ones that call us and say, hey, I have a student who belongs in SMART and they were on my campus. Our students who are in SMART have a habit of going back to the school that they were suspended or expelled from, and those administrators know who those kids are, so they call us and let us know, and we have a discussion with them, or we have the school official trespass them, so they're not allowed to go back.
okay.
And what was the other part of your question?
Well, there were concerns about FERPA, and I mean,
With the confidentiality of CEC and SMART. So
yes.
I want to continue with what I said earlier of how difficult this is. And we don't have all the answers. We haven't set all of those things in motion yet. So I picture our SMART kids are still down here where they are, and a teacher, more than one, I'm going to go with the option 3. We have a couple people that are still down in SMART, and one of them is down there and goes and gets somebody that if they need the counselor, if it's that counselor, or if it's the teacher that they need, then they take them down there. So they'll still be separate down in SMART versus CEC. And again, there are so many options that we are out there. I'm going to stick with option 3.
So if I could comment a little on what you were asking about.
Go ahead, Mr. Kine.
I think what we look at is a program that needs a great deal of structure and a program that thrives in having very little structure. Students at CEC come and go at all different times. We never know how many we'll have. Right now we have very few students who come in, but we're still in sort of an interesting COVID mode. The students we have as juniors are still thinking in terms of, they weren't going to school. What we look at when we look at it is we look at the need for more structure on the CEC side and able to guarantee what, the SMART folks are talking about, that SMART students, as far as we understand, are to be separate from other students. And how we would make that happen. And then when we talk about, going back and forth, when we look at, so there only being one, maybe 2 people in SMART because that one person's shared, then you're getting into an interesting supervision model where at CEC, we never do anything without 2 people in the room. There are always 2 adults supervising at any given time. And when we're looking at this, what we sort of see is, if we are involved in SMART and we're involved in, then we have to create more structure, because we would see, I think we would have to be more involved in supervision, because there's only one person formally, 100% of the time in SMART, and then there's that shared counselor. I see things in many ways gravitating towards SMART in a supervisory mode, not in terms of the skills and stuff these folks have, but that's where my concern lies in terms of how things would change with CEC, because of how I understand supervising discipline situations and the separate facility, the need for keeping them separate. Because I haven't figured out how we would do the check-ins where students would come up to CEC to check in and things like that. I mean, there's lots to figure out, that's true. There's a lot to figure out. And I see a lot to figure out that would change CEC and change SMART from my perspective.
So I'm going to go back to the checking in, because I think I addressed that before. I don't see the students checking, smart students checking in with CEC. That was before, that was from the original. I didn't change it just because there's so many options that are available right now. I can't say this is exactly the way that this is going to be. I'm still going to stick with option 3, that there's something else.
Are there any additional questions at this time? Thank you for sharing with us. We appreciate it. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Dorn.
Okay, I'm just going to say that my question is, what is the plan? If we go with the proposed budget as is, we don't know what we're doing. And so I really would like to see the plan. Right now, I'm not supportive of what we're doing, but convince me, what's the plan?
Thank you, guys.
So just for clarification, Mr. Dorn, you want a plan for options C and B? Ms. Smith gave another option. So you want 2 plans? Is that what you're looking for?
I don't know. And I don't mean that flippantly. We keep getting, this is the plan, the proposal, but we don't know what it means to do it. And so if we change one program that's working well, we greatly reduce another program that's working well, what is the plan to really do that? And the only one we have is, we're just going to meld them and we'll make room. That's it, but we're moving other places out. So I'm not being flippant with saying, what is the plan? It's that I keep hearing, we don't know. And I think very genuinely and sincerely and refreshingly that that's said. So for me to support basically the elimination of a program that means something greatly to our kids, has been successful, means something to our schools to get more kids to graduation, reduce our dropout rate. To support that, I really want to know what the plan is. Whether it's C, D, E, F, I don't know.
So, yeah. So the plan is not to eliminate any programs. That's not a part of the plan. Both programs would still exist. So I just want to make that clear, that we're not eliminating any programs. So we can put some things together for you.
Okay, Ms. Marotti, and then Ms. Hardy.
I think I feel Mr. Dorn's frustration in the lack of a plan. I don't think a couple pages on a PowerPoint are sufficient to become a plan. It reminds me a lot of the school closures last year where there was no plan presented to the board, even though we asked repeatedly. I think that providing a comprehensive plan on what is being proposed, I know there's lots of options out there now, but what is being proposed, if the experts in this room feel like that is the best option and that's why it was proposed, then where's the plan behind that? Where's the comprehensive, including fiscal, operations, stakeholder input, experts from both of those programs provided input into this plan, a very comprehensive plan if we're going to make this decision. That should come with every large decision we have to make when it comes to budget cuts.
Ms. Hardy?
Kind of along the same lines, but how do I best say this? I think, and because we don't vote and we don't make any decisions in work sessions, very clear on that, but the consensus is that we're not comfortable with what has been presented to us right now as the option of combining. I would like to be presented with a, like Ms. Smith said, a fleshed out Plan C, what this could look like, how we can balance the budget that is not breaking both programs in the manner that's been proposed. So I think, because that's the point of this work session. We're discussing, we're saying, well, actually, this isn't what we're looking for. It shouldn't come to us making line item changes up there during a vote. I would much rather work it out here and have something we feel comfortable and have workshopped before we start making that decision up there.
Thank you, Ms. Hardy, for your comments, and I'll just say to the board that if this is the direction we're going, I would ask that you would give the administration and team time without, any extra emails so that they can formulate all this information, get a plan. And I would also ask the board, you are creative thinkers also. Let's think on it also. So, Mr. Dorn, you have a comment or is this a question?
Clarification question. So we have one more work session scheduled right now on the budget, which is March 20th. So we would expect this information and which we've been giving here would be coming forward on the 20th. Is that right?
We can give you the information prior to the board meeting or to the work session, so you can have information at the work session. We don't have to wait to give that to you, so.
Great. I really appreciate that, and I would prefer that, yes.
Ms. B?
I would just like to make a comment as we come up with options. I would like to see any emails that you guys are asking as board members from CEC or to SMART to please direct those to me, because I know that there's some communications that are going on, whether you're in person or by phone or by email. If we have all that information here at the administrative office, that helps a lot, because I know that there's questions that Mr. Kind has gotten or questions that Ms. Valerie has gotten. And if we don't know what's being said, I don't know how to address what you're looking for.
Mr. Dorn?
Clarification through the administration. I know I've been sending my questions to you. I assume they go out. Is that how you want it to still go to you, or how do you want these?
If you include, if you're emailing Ms. Beam, if you'll include me, and then we'll all know what's being said to everyone else, and it's not a guessing game. Did you get this one? Did you not get that one? And that just makes it a lot more, and that's kind of the board protocol is that I'm CC'd on everything. So that's the best way to do it. So we're not left guessing, did you get this one? Did you get that one? Which has kind of been what's happening.
Okay, I've sent them directly to you. You've gotten mine directly, and then you've chance to parse them out. Okay, thank you.
Anything further?
Okay, now next, per request, we have a short presentation on charter school funding. So Mr. DeGraw is going to talk about that. And then we also have the interactive spreadsheet ready to look at for the information that we've been given.
Ms. Moratti?
Did I miss the HR presentation, department presentation? Are we not doing that?
Not at this time.
Not this one.
Not at this time.
Okay.
Could we hold for a moment? We have 4 board members who are out of the room at the moment. So we can wait for someone to come back. Ms. Anderson, just so you know, we took a recess because we had 4 members out of the room and then others who were going. So we're back on and you're back in the chair.
Where were we?
So now I think we're up and ready, and Mr. DeGraw is going to talk about charter school funding.
All right, thank you, Ms. Moline. So Ms. Richardson just emailed board members a copy of this document, so you have it in your email or you can follow along on the monitors. So this is a hypothetical funding sheet, so I'll just walk through the different multipliers and how we get to charter funding. Again, this isn't any one of our specific charters here in the district. It's a hypothetical scenario that I put together. So we start out with an enrollment. We have a hypothetical enrollment of 170. The first item that number goes through is the school size adjustment for charters, which is right there, the 239.7. So it increases from 170 to 239.7 based on the school size. And there's different multipliers based on different size schools. We then go through the same multipliers that district-wide funding goes through. So charters are treated very similar to a school district. It's kind of like I've used the term mini school district in the past related to funding and how they're funded. So again, 170 to 239. Then we go through the regional cost adjustment, which is a 7% multiplier. It then is multiplied by the special ed 1.2% multiplier. This next one is we've split out high school, the voc ed 1.5%. None of our charter schools are high schools, so they don't qualify for the 1%. They actually receive a 0.5% voc ed multiplier for middle school. And that gets us to our final adjusted ADM of 309.31. Then we multiply that number by the 5960, that's the BSA that is currently in our proposed budget for FY24. Gets a basic need of $1,843,509. We then add in quality schools, share of the local contribution. Impact aid, there's nothing there because if you recall, district funding subtracts impact aid at the point of establishment of the basic need. Impact aid is deducted. We're not deducting that on the top line here. And then any other supplemental funding that might be added. Usually, most years, there is nothing in this section as far as supplemental or additional aid added in. So, President Sanderson, do you want me to stop for questions?
No, you can keep going. Okay, Ms. Matheson has one quick little one.
Thank you. Okay, so you were saying that, I'm all trying to touch the screen. We don't have high school allocations because we don't have high school charters. So then I need clarification. Star of the North, is that a charter?
It
So it's
used to be a
like
charter.
Okay, I'm with you.
Now it's a department of the district.
Thank you.
Okay.
So what about Effie? Does Effie get their investment?
Ms. Moretti, and then Mr. Doran.
I'm a little confused. When I first got on the board in 2018, I asked why some schools that were similar size, some had less funding than others, and I was told it was due to the need for SPED services. So if there were more services needed at different schools, then they got additional funding for those SPED services because they were federally mandated. So now I'm confused because this presentation makes it look like it's solely based off enrollment, and then they get a percentage that all schools get the same based on the formula, the foundation formula factors. So I'm confused.
Okay, so just to clarify, Ms. Moretti, you recall understanding somebody indicating to you that charters receive different amounts of money? I want to make sure I understand your question.
Not just charters, that schools receive different amounts of money because, so if they have more sped needs, then they need more money to meet those needs. And so they would get additional funds to meet those sped needs.
So I'm looking at Kate Hall, and I'm venturing to guess that that definitely applies to our regular attendance area schools, whether they have, based on different student counts, whether they're hosting district-wide programs. Charter schools do not function that way, and we can get a little bit more into that a little later, but our charter school funding, the funding that I'm describing, is what charter schools receive in the state of Alaska.
Just clarify.
Ms. Moretti, go
So
ahead.
just to clarify, non-charter schools do get additional funding based on their sped needs to meet those needs, but charter schools do not.
I'm going to defer to Ms. Hall.
I don't think that that's entirely accurate. If you're looking at, the only thing that I can, I don't know why this is so echo, probably, I don't know. Maybe it's Mr. Dorrance. The only thing I can think of that's based on individual student count is we multiply out like supply money, I think, by actual sped student count. So those numbers would vary. Otherwise, special education staff exists within the special education budget, and we allocate staff based on where students are. And so things like district-wide programs that Mr. DeGraw mentions, but that doesn't send money to the school. The only dollars I can think of is a relatively small percentage of money that goes in based on number of students for supplies.
Follow up, and then Ms. Hardy.
Okay, thank you. So, but we do allocate staff to those schools that staff do cost money, so then this staff with
Yes.
the money gets allocated to the school.
Yes.
But not for charters.
I think that question will better be answered when Mr. DeGraw gets through the rest of the spreadsheet.
Okay.
You want to hold? Okay, Mr. Doran doesn't want to hold.
That's right. Thank you. In terms of the formula here for the Volk High School piece and middle school piece, we have Evie Cochrane, which is middle school, high school, so they would get the multiplier, is that correct?
Correct.
And then how about grades 6, 7, 8 in the other schools that are middle school? So they get the multiplier
They
for
would-
those students?
Yeah, correct.
For that portion?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And just to clarify, the multipliers are multiplied by the total student enrollment, not just multiplied by the number of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, so.
Okay, so just to clarify then, so I understand that, so basically the kindergarten through 5 benefit from it being a 6, 7, 8, a K-8 school?
Yeah, the school,
They get
the school receives more money because the multiplier is applied to all
The
students in the
full
school.
200 or
Correct.
thereabouts, whatever in the school.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so let's see, we were at total school, so initial funding here after the various components. The district is allowed to charge up to 4% to charters for district-wide services, fixed costs, infrastructure, supports, staffing, and other supports that charter schools benefit from. So this is where we deduct the 4%. We have various items that are subtracted from their total funding before the 4% is applied. We're not allowed to include 4% charge on like rent and utilities that charters pay. So those items are subtracted out from the 1.9 to get down to the 1.6, and then the 4% is applied to arrive at the 64,000 number that is shown. Those are dollars that are allowed to be subtracted from the revenue again for overhead supports that the district provides. Human resources, IT, teaching and learning, curriculum, administration, accounting, budget help, lengthy list, payroll services, lengthy list of admin supports, overhead supports that are provided.
Mr. Doran?
So did I understand that those indirect costs, like the electricity, the energy, whatever, okay, heating, those things, we're paying rent for those facilities, but we also pay for the utilities and snow removal, all of that. The landlords do not provide any of those.
Correct. The charter is paying those bills with the revenue that they're receiving from the school district.
Okay, that's not part of the indirect costs that we get, that 4%.
Correct. It's deducted out of their revenue before the 4% is applied.
Oh, okay. Great, thank you.
So 64,000 is deducted from the 1.9 million to arrive at $1.879 million. At the bottom here, we have an item that is informational only. I want to make clear, charters have asked about this often lately, and this is an item that relates to special education supports that the district might or might not provide to charters. So in many of our charters, a majority of our charters, there's a clause that the district will provide support, curriculum, supervision, or curriculum coordinating, supervision, different specialty supports. In those clauses in charters and contracts, it states that the district will withhold 50% of the special ed allocation that is allotted to charters. We are not doing this for any of our charters. So this 152,000 is the amount identified in this hypothetical scenario. And if you notice, it's not being deducted. It's just a number that the total is identified, and then it's not being deducted. On line 70, we have total charter funding after the 4% is subtracted out, and then the total bottom line is the exact same number. So there's some confusion here. Charters think, I've visited with a couple of head teachers, they think it's being deducted. It's not being deducted, but the number is being identified. And again, I'm not sure the history of this, but with funding comes responsibility. We are not withholding any special ed dollars from charters right now. And at the same time, we are providing a certain level of support to charter schools at the district level. So just want to clarify that. You could get questions on what that is. And it's a calculation that's done relating to a portion of language in charters that says the district can charge for services it provides.
Ms. Moretti, are you ready?
Yep, sorry. This is probably my weakest subject. Can you explain again what that initial SPED education allocation, that 50% of blocking funding is?
Yeah.
Even though we're not doing it?
Yeah. So if we go back up to the top, so it's line, and the lines came out in the emails, hopefully, that you received with this, or illustrating the, where is it? Right. So we're looking at from line 22 to line 23. The adjusted ADM goes from 256.5 to 307.7. That's the special ed multiplier, the 1.2. So if you take that increase, it's about 62, 63 students-ish, and you multiply it by 5960, you come up with a number. It must be right around $305,000 total of what the charter received by way of that 20% multiplier, 305, $306,000. This is half of that, 305, and charters, in the charters and contracts that we have with them, it states that if and when the district provides services, it's difficult for a charter of a couple hundred kids to have a structure set up to provide a lot of these specialty services that their students have. The district, a much larger organization, has that infrastructure established and has the ability to provide those services. So this is a number that's identified that states when the district steps in and partners with the charter for a laundry list of services and supports that we're going to provide to charters, we're going to charge this amount to that charter school for providing those services.
May I follow up?
Yes, and then Ms. Hardy is ready for her question.
That means, so you're saying that if the district provided services, sped services, then the district can deduct 50% of that,
Of the special
of the
ed.
sped allocation.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, thank you.
And just to repeat, we're actually not deducting those dollars currently from any of the charter schools.
But are we providing services?
Yes.
Okay.
Ms. Hardy?
Yeah, and I have a few, so you can stop me, and I will be patient. So when we are taking out that 4% administrative fee, at what point in the year are we calculating that? Because like we give the charter school a budget thing at the beginning with assumed costs. Are we refunding charters part of that 4% fee when their actual expenditures go over the amount, like they pay more for a utility than was expected? Because then we should not be taking as much of that money.
Yeah, it's actually based on their revenue, so it's 4% of the revenue that we're charging that 4% on.
Less
Not,
rent, utilities, and all of those things, but those things can't be known till the end of the year.
right,
So when are we?
So it's when the 20-day count occurs in October, then the state reconciles data and corrects any errors in the district-wide data that we have. So we get final, so the short answer to your question is once we get final enrollment numbers, that helps us establish this top line number right here. Line 8, the top line.
I don't think I totally get what you're talking about, average daily membership, all of that. I'm talking about when we subtract that 4%
Same
fee.
time.
Right? So we subtract that at the same time without actually knowing the actual cost of utilities and all the things that the charters will have for that year. Or are we basing it on last year's and then like that? You get where I'm coming from?
Yeah, it's all updated at that time. So we finalize a final worksheet.
But so like I just know, not that it's I know that like the charter my son attends had a $50,000 gas bill come up in the middle of this year. That $50,000 should be subtracted from what our district is taking out with a 4%. Where are we accounting for those incidental huge maintenance, because it's part of buildings and utilities, before we subtract that from the charters?
So, yeah, if those are popping up in the middle of the year, after, then if the head teacher lets us know, then we can make that adjustment.
Okay.
So that's how it would happen, is if the head teacher notices or the principal notices an amount that's higher than what we have listed, then they could let us know and we could make the adjustment.
Okay, and I can wait or I can ask more, it's up to you.
Just Matheson, and then I'll come back.
Why aren't we charging that 50%?
I can't answer that question. When I arrived 4 or 5 years ago, none of the amounts were being charged. So we're being good partners with our charters, in my opinion.
You have a follow-up? You don't think about it?
Yeah, I need to be tactful when I ask this one.
Please.
Okay.
Yes. Ms. Hardy?
Yeah, so next one. And like, to go kind of, Maggie and I have similar questions there, and I've given it a lot of thought. And Mr. DeGraw and I actually were able to have a conversation last Friday about some of this. And my question is, without charging that 50%, which is a part of all of our charter contracts, right? Per how we're providing SPED funding to our charters, are we not disincentivizing charters from accepting students with disabilities? So the less you have, the more money you have not providing these services, and then charters that are providing more services are having to bear a bigger brunt of that cost. We're not keeping things level across the board, and we do have charters that have higher SPED populations than others.
What is your question?
Are we not creating a disincentive for charters to have individuals with IEPs at their school if we're just giving them block funding. Okay. Yeah, well, we're not. So, and Ms. Hall and I had the same discussion, that by idea and federal law, our charters are supposed to accept anybody that applies. That there is a continuum of services, and that sometimes a charter is not a school or a child's least restrictive environment. And that's just sped talk, totally, that's the way it works. But some schools have very high sped populations. Some charter schools have very high sped populations where they have like a full-time sped teacher. Some charter schools have a 0.5. So when we give them their funding and we allow them to keep all of that funding, charter schools that have higher sped populations are spending that money to give services as it's needed for sped, and charter schools with lower sped populations are able to spend that money on other things that are not sped. And I am, you know, I have been around a long time, and so my question is, though, how is that, what's the second order effect that we're creating in not following our own contracts, in not doing these things? And I can say Anchorage in 2014 went through similar things, and you know, I want to be equitable, and I want our charters to be successful, and I want SPED students to be welcome and fully provided for at our charters. Those are where I'm at.
Ms. Hall, do you want to follow up, or?
Sure. I absolutely agree with the last statement that you made, that we want our SPED students to be welcome at our charters and to be provided for at our charters. And I think part of the why the 50% isn't being taken, or who's responsible to do what, is a large part of why we're having this conversation right now, to determine a path forward going into next year that's not going to cripple charter budgets, is not going to create surprises within the SPED budget as things are happening. So one note related to the disincentives for students with disabilities. I don't have the staffing right in front of me, but I am 95% certain that all of our charter schools have a full-time special education teacher. I think at one point, one of the schools had reduced to a 0.8, but they had a full-time aide during that time also. So I think in general, the supports are very much the same across the schools. In general, the supports across the schools don't match the 50% amount of money that we're sort of looking at as bare minimum for those supports. And to that end, you know, as a result of the meeting that we had last Friday, I'm going to work with each of the charter schools. I set 4 of the 5 meetings up today to sort of talk about projected students for next year, what their anticipated staffing needs are, and sort of what the expectation for that funding is, so that neither party, the district or the charter schools, have big surprises or gaps in services going into next school year is the plan. Does that follow up in the...
Ms. Hardy, is that good?
And I totally appreciate that, Kate. And that wasn't like Kate's, she's on it. And that it still doesn't change what I'm saying. And I completely appreciate that we're going to make sure from the district standpoint, which is how we left the meeting, that the students at the charters are going to receive the services that they need per their IEPs and per their needs at those charters. The thing is still, though, some of those schools are going to have, when we start doing that, much higher service needs than other schools, which is different than a neighborhood school, like Ms. Marati pointed out, that at a neighborhood school, you would not take any funding from the classrooms in order to provide for those SPED students. But at a charter, because it's all coming out of the big same pot, and we're going to do this, there are going to be impacts to the general ed classrooms in order to provide those services to SPED students at those charters. And that's the difference.
Ms. Matheson, and then Ms. Marati.
Thank you. Are we proposing then that we start charging the 50% out, or to rectify any disenfranchisement to any of our students, or how do we fix this?
Yeah,
That's what I want to know. How do we fix it?
And I think that's the bigger discussion through the chair. I don't want to, and I don't have a, like, this is the way I think we should do it. I'm pointing out that I've noticed that there are things that we do need to talk about and have a bigger discussion, and being very clear that I support our charters. My kid goes to a charter. I support our SPED programs. I support our neighborhood schools. I'm trying to make sure that when it comes to students on IEPs, that their IEPs are being met, and that it's also not going to have negative impacts on the classrooms, the gen ed classrooms. As a special educator, that was a big thing, is SPED students in our classrooms bring something to our classrooms. They bring resources. Oftentimes, they can come with an aid, or they come with extra supports that make our classrooms better. Special education students do not detract from our schools. And sometimes with the way the stuff is going to go down at the charters, it's going to detract from our general ed classrooms by the way of the nature of the funding. And figuring that out is a bigger issue, and I'm not saying we're going to solve it tonight or even this year. I'm saying that this is something the board should talk about and we need to become better educated on.
Ms. Brady.
I also thank you for bringing this to the board's attention and working with administration. And what it sounds like is that charter schools are not, may or may not be getting enough funding to support the special education needs in their schools. And if they do have high needs, that comes from the money that they do receive, instead of where the rest of the district, non-charter schools, receive additional services. It sounds like Mrs. Hall is going to meet with the charter school leaderships and determine what that looks like across the district. Forgive me if I'm wrong. What I would like, and what it sounds like additional board members are hoping for, is that we receive follow-up from this, from what is determined, so that the board can then see the follow-through on this.
Ms. Hall.
In general, I think a yes to all of that, with the exception of neighborhood schools receiving additional funding for special ed, or even additional staff being, I guess I fundamentally disagree that that's different. It's still based on enrollment. It's still based on the needs of students in the building. That doesn't change. You've taken a 28 school pot and divided it up amongst 28 schools, as opposed to a one school pot that you're dividing with its own population. There isn't like a different amount of money somewhere that the neighborhood schools are getting. It's just being allocated. So that would be the only point that I would disagree with.
Mrs. Smith.
Thank you. I think this question is for Ms. Hall, just to clarify. So this is all exclusive of like IR and of kids who, I don't understand how we can possibly fathom having a kid who needs a 1 to 3 aid in a charter school that only has one kid in that grade who needs the aid. So we're effectively going to have to fund 1-to-1 aids for every single kid. I mean, I just start getting overwhelmed. I am special ed, like totally support charter schools. My kids go to a charter. I have 2 kids with IEPs. So I'm not knocking on anything here, but I am saying that in reality, sometimes the charter school isn't the right service environment because they need a 1 to 3 aid and it can't be provided in that classroom. I don't know.
And I think Ms. Hardy spoke to that at the very beginning of if it's been determined that the charter school is that student's least restrictive environment, which is not always the case. And so while we do have to have programs for intensive resource students and students with severe behavioral needs, among other things, we don't have to make those available at every single one of our campuses. We can have consolidated district-wide programs, and those exist within our neighborhood schools. So there are circumstances where, based on a student's need, that the charter school might not be the appropriate placement for them because they require the specialization of that district-wide program that you're suggesting. Just like a student who attends Wood River, for instance, and has needs that would best be met in an intensive resource class. That support doesn't exist at Wood River, so we would have that student move to U Park or to Hunter based on what those needs are. Same sort of a situation. So if a charter doesn't have that district-wide capability, then those services would be available in a school that does have that, one of the neighborhood schools. So no, it's not a suggestion that students with district-wide needs would have to have their needs met at the charter schools. Does that answer your question?
I mean, it sort of does, but what about the 1 to 3 aid or, you know, even the emotional support aid or something like that? I mean, there just isn't an emotional support aid. I mean, I don't want to have just an outright debate here, but I guess maybe me and Ms. Hardy need to talk another time, because I'm not understanding how, if all the charter schools have a special education teacher and there's kids there who have an IEP and their IEP is being met by their aide, the only thing in my mind that I go to is like, okay, so some kids need an aide and they're not getting one because there's not enough funding for them. And that, to me, starts to mean, is the charter school the right environment because they can't provide an aide for a kid who needs an aide? And are we required to provide the funding for the aide, or are we required to ask the kid to go to a different environment? That's what I want to know.
And those decisions would be kind of on a case-by-case basis related to that individual student and that individual need. So potentially either one of those things could be possible, that we would suggest a change in location and placement, or that if it, you know, depending on the circumstances, that was done through the charter.
But I will piggyback on Mrs. Smith's comment, because in the meeting, my question I came out with was, when charters come before the school board to have their charters approved, some questions we might need to be or should be asking is, how are you meeting your SPED population, especially when it's pointed out that the increase of SPED students for our charter schools are growing. So that was the question for myself. So for us as a board, when we approve that charter, that might be a question, or to say, how are you going to support with your funding your special ed program? So I get that. Mr. Dorn?
If I could just hitchhike on what you were referencing there, and not, part of this is not in the budget tonight, but related. You mentioned contracts and annual reports. I believe we asked last year, and we've asked this year, that those presented separately, that the annual report is different than the contract renewal. Are we still on track to do those separately?
Yes, we're doing some significant work with our charter schools on the contract. So they're still working on that contract language and what it's going to look like. So they will be separate.
Okay, at different times or the same night? Do we know?
We don't know yet. We can do it however works best.
Okay, thank you. I would suggest spreading them out, because but I don't want to get into that further tonight with the budget discussion.
Were there any additional questions on the spreadsheet that Mr. DeGraw has in front of us? Ms. Harding?
It's just one more, and it's related to funding, not so much to SPED. That when we distributed our CARES fund and our CARES aids, did we distribute those to our charters as well, or only our neighborhood schools?
So the first 2 years ago, there was a CARES aid allocated to charter schools. In the current year, last year's budget cycle, the board approved a CARES budget that removed the CARES funded tutor positions for charter schools.
Follow-up.
Go ahead.
Was there a reason why we chose to not equally distribute it to our charters as district schools?
I can't speak to the why on that, Ms. Hardy.
Ms. Maradi?
Was that a board decision?
It was a board vote, Ms. Maradi.
Yeah, when we determined the COVID, the CARES funds allocation. Okay, we can watch.
Any further discussion? questions, comments?
We don't have any more presentations at this time. We do have our interactive spreadsheet up. If we want to do any work around moving numbers around, there was a little bit of a conversation this evening about funding options with the CEC Smart programs. I don't know if we want to get into that, trading those things out tonight or not. It's up to you.
Ms. Marati.
Through the chair, I apologize, Mr. DeGraw. It was the spreadsheet that we're using for the whole budget, not the charter school one that I needed emailed. Did that get emailed?
Oh, the
Interactive one.
Oh, okay, I'll need to, yeah, we were prepared to send out the charter one. I'll need to do some fandangling to get it emailable.
Okay.
So
Mr.
we'll
Dorn.
get that out to you tonight.
Okay.
Or tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
I know for myself, I would like to at least get the introduction to the interactive spreadsheet. I am very concerned that we are getting down to the timeline where we have to approve budget. And we better have the training now so that when we come back on the 20th, we can really hit.
That was my thinking about having it available this evening and going through it. In the board brief, I asked if board members had additional cuts or things they would like to put onto the interactive spreadsheet, that they do that ahead of time so Mr. DeGraw and his team could have a chance to build it out. Some of the board members did that, and so those do now appear on the cut list. So Mr. DeGraw is going to go over how this particular spreadsheet works. Before we do that, I do want to address some of the impacts of the additional reductions. So for the proposed budget, we went through the impacts earlier. With the additional reductions, I want to make sure we go through those impacts. And the first one I want to address is the North Star College reduction of $400,000. You see that on the right-hand side of the spreadsheet there. There was a reduction sent in of the $400,000 out of North Star College. So the impacts, and Mr. DeGraw can talk further about, or not Mr. DeGraw, Mr. Minor can talk further about the impacts, but those could be significant to standing up the program like we had, like the board had voted to expand it. It would also impact the program in the way that we've described it to parents and students. One possible way to keep North Star College going is to reduce staff, possibly limit the number of classes students could take, which again would significantly impact the program that we said we were going to offer. Mr. Minor, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I don't at this time. I mean, I think we would need to really dig into what that would do to the program and whether or not we would actually be able to run the school with $400,000 less dollars.
So that's a real impact that we're looking at to that particular reduction. That is the one. Is there another one on there, Mr. Okay, yeah. Burnett staffing. The impact would be to the school. And we heard from, Barnett and the folks there earlier. So you did hear a little bit about those impacts in an earlier work session. The special ed director, this is a departure from how traditionally we would make a reduction. We don't generally, the board doesn't generally say this staff position or that staff position when it's within a department here at the district level. So if it's a $155,000 reduction in special ed that we're looking for, then we would task Mrs. Hall with finding $155,000 to cut from the special education budget. rather than doing a position. So that, we heard earlier tonight the importance of having staffing for our special education students and our special education teachers. The impact would be significant, especially at a time that we're seeing an increase in special education needs. That's why the proposed budget does not see any reductions in special education, because we're just seeing substantial increases in needs, substantial increase in being able to support, and we heard it again with our charter schools. That's an area that has just shown a great need, which we wouldn't be able to do those things with a reduction in that particular area. Which again is why we didn't propose any financial impacts to the special education department. So those three things have been added to the list that were not a part of the proposed budget. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. DeGraw to talk about how this spreadsheet works.
Yeah, so the spreadsheet will work very similar, if not identical, to how the CARES, we navigated the CARES budget last year. So right now, at the top line, we just have, our budget is balanced as of the proposed budget, and then we can simply add in identifiers. So we would, if we want to reduce our PTR at the elementary level, we indicate add there, and then a deficit shows up. If we want to, on the flip side of that, if we want to go ahead and make a reduction to North Star College, the word cut is inserted, and then it would reduce that 1.7 down to 1.3, reflecting the $400,000 decrease in costs at North Star College. So that's how we can maneuver that, and kind of just an interactive tool that the board can use to track additions and subtractions from the proposed budget to get to your recommended budget.
So for instance, so correct me if I'm wrong here, Mr. DeGraw. So for instance, the option, the third option that Mrs. Smith was talking about earlier, when it comes to the smart counselor, smart tutor, if you're going to keep some of those positions.
So to that point, Ms.
Yep.
Moline, yeah, we've split out the SMART staff, for example, into 3 individual positions here on 16, 17, and 18. So we can make suggestions, and the board can consider different scenarios with individual staff, individual positions. We don't necessarily have, and that was in proposed budget. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe we had anything related to CEC staff in the proposed budget, just SMART staff,
Just
correct?
SMART staff, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So in addition, if there's additional positions, so if there's additional positions we want to put in, then our average cost is $117,000 for a teaching position. Is that correct?
Correct.
So that's a number that if you're putting in positions, that's the number that you have to think about as a trade-off. So we're happy to entertain any questions about our shiny little interactive spreadsheet here. I do want to thank Mr. DeGraw and his staff for the work they put onto this, and I'd also like to thank Mrs. Beam and her relentless support of the programs and of the administration and all the work she does there at Alternative Programs.
So I believe the interactive spreadsheet will be emailed to the board, and then we can play around with that and see. So are there any additional questions at this time? Mr. Dorn?
Okay, thank you very much for putting this together. I think it'll be helpful as we get it, and since we have to balance from one side of the sheet to the other. And part of as I get to my question, the There's nothing on this list that we would like to do without. And I think the piece and maybe the linkage to the add backs, if we do get more funding, would be important, so that things might come off here, but they're going to go on there. So with that, if we have further ideas of looking at different parts of the budget where we might potentially save, I'm hesitant to throw any particular ones out. I mean, I do have two in mind that could be there to cause undue consternation before we see them, but if we have suggestions to make, how do you want us to handle that? Wait until we come back on the 20th and to see if they can be put on this list?
We'll need to have those suggestions so we can cost it out. So that's why it's important to get it ahead of time, so Mr. DeGraw and his team can have time to cost it out and put it on the spreadsheet. So if you have ideas and things you want to have appear on this spreadsheet that aren't, go ahead and send that to Mr. DeGraw and his team, and he can cost it out and add it to it, and then it'll be turned yellow. And anything that's added, we can speak to the impacts at the next board meeting or work session.
Mr. DeGraw?
Yeah, just kind of a general, if the board could have any additional suggestions for this list 1 week from today by the 13th, that would be helpful for my office to be able to have time to cost it out.
Ms. Marotti?
And then I did some math that is the same math I do every year, where I list the departments based on the cuts that they're taking this year, and I put them on the board members' desks if you'd like them.
Anything further? Additional comments or questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
We are adjourned. Thank you.